What if I told you that in the dead of night, an invisible cloud of poison swept through a sleeping city, leaving over 3,000 people dead within hours and tens of thousands more gasping for breath? Imagine waking up to burning eyes, blistering skin, and choking lungs while the air around you turned deadly. This isn't a scene from a dystopian movie. This was reality in Bhopal, India, on the night of December 2nd, 1984. A disaster so horrific, it remains the worst industrial catastrophe the world has ever seen. But how did this tragedy happen? How could a single night change the lives of so many people forever? The Bhopal gas tragedy was the result of a toxic gas leak from a pesticide plant operated by Union Carbide India Limited. The plant was meant to represent progress, development, and modern industry. Instead, it became a ticking time bomb that detonated in the most gruesome way. Around midnight, as most of the city slept, over 40 tons of methyl isocyanate, a highly toxic chemical used to manufacture pesticides, leaked from a faulty storage tank. With no proper warning system and insufficient safety measures, the gas silently crept across neighborhoods, suffocating everything in its path. Entire families awoke in confusion and terror, only to realize they were breathing in a lethal mist. The horror unfolded quickly. People ran blindly through the streets, clutching their throats, tears streaming from their swollen eyes, trying to escape the unseen killer. Mothers carried their limp children, desperately seeking help that wasn't there. Fathers fell to their knees, unable to go any further. The hospitals were overwhelmed within minutes. Doctors had no idea what they were dealing with, treating victims whose bodies were burning from the inside out. The death toll climbed relentlessly, 3,000 in the first few hours, but the suffering was just beginning. Over the next few days, the official death count reached 8,000, and the long-term effects would claim tens of thousands more. But why did it happen? Why was this plant, sitting in the middle of a densely populated city, so dangerously unsafe? Investigations revealed a horrifying truth. Safety standards were ignored, warnings were dismissed, and corners were cut to save money. The plant's safety systems had been neglected or turned off. There was no functional refrigeration system to keep the deadly gas under control. The alarms that should have alerted people to the leak were faulty, and the water spray system meant to neutralize the gas was hopelessly inadequate. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and it did. The aftermath was devastating. The people of Bhopal were left to suffer long after the gas had dissipated. Children were born with deformities. The soil and water remained poisoned. Generations were affected by chronic illnesses, cancer, respiratory problems, and neurological damage. The compensation offered to the victims was a cruel joke, a pittance that could never make up for their suffering. Union Carbide's CEO, Warren Anderson, was arrested but released on bail and never returned to India to face justice. For many, justice was a distant dream that faded away. Decades later, Bhopal still bears the scars. Survivors continue to fight for recognition, for clean water, for basic health care. The abandoned Union Carbide plant stands as a monument to corporate negligence and human tragedy, a haunting reminder of what happens when profit is placed above human lives. The Bhopal disaster wasn't just an industrial accident. It was a crime against humanity, a betrayal of trust that shattered thousands of lives. So why should we remember Bhopal? Because the story of Bhopal is a warning. It's a reminder of how easily lives can be lost when safety, accountability, and ethics are ignored. It's a reminder that the cost of negligence is not measured in dollars, but in lives. The victims of Bhopal deserve more than our sympathy. They deserve our vigilance. We must remember their story so that nothing like this ever happens again. The question remains, have we truly learned from Bhopal, or are we still walking the same dangerous path? The next industrial disaster could be brewing somewhere right now, hidden beneath promises of progress and profit. The lives lost in Bhopal were more than just numbers. They were people with dreams, families, and futures that were stolen in a single night. On a quiet night in early December 1984, the people of Bhopal, India, went to bed with no idea that life as they knew it was about to change forever. Within hours, an invisible toxic cloud would descend on their city. Thousands would die in the streets, and tens of thousands more would be scarred for life. It was an event that would become known as the worst industrial disaster in human history, How could something so devastating happen? And why did so many lives have to be lost? The disaster began at the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal. The facility, meant to bring economic development and progress to the region, was producing a chemical called methyl isocyanate, or MIC, a highly toxic substance used to manufacture pesticides. On the night of December 2nd, a leak in one of the storage tanks released more than 40 tons of this deadly gas into the air. What followed was pure horror. As the gas seeped out, a thick, invisible cloud spread across the city. It moved silently, carried by the wind, invading homes where families lay sleeping. The first sign of trouble was a burning sensation in the eyes and throat. People awoke coughing, gasping for air, unsure of what was happening. The air itself had turned into poison. In sheer panic, they fled their homes, running blindly through the dark streets, searching for safety that didn't exist. Hospitals were overwhelmed almost immediately. Doctors and nurses were faced with a crisis they were unprepared for. People arriving with eyes swollen shut, bodies convulsing, and lungs failing. The toxic gas attacked the respiratory system, causing fluid to build up in the lungs. Victims essentially drowned from the inside. By morning, the streets of Bhopal were littered with the bodies of men, women, and children who hadn't made it. The official death toll in those first few hours was over 3,000, but the real number was likely much higher, and the suffering was far from over. In the weeks, months, and years that followed, the true extent of the disaster became clear. Many who survived that night suffered permanent injuries, blindness, respiratory problems, neurological damage, and cancer. Pregnant women lost their unborn children, and those who gave birth later often had children with severe birth defects. The poisoned air, soil, and water ensured that the legacy of this disaster would stretch across generations. But the tragedy of Bhopal wasn't just the leak itself, it was everything that led up to it. The Union Carbide plant had been plagued with safety issues for years. Warning signs were ignored, equipment was poorly maintained, and critical safety systems were either malfunctioning or switched off to save costs. The refrigeration system meant to keep the MIC stable wasn't functioning. The gas scrubber, which could have neutralized the leak, was offline. The alarms that might have given people time to escape were broken. In the pursuit of profit, safety had been sacrificed. Justice for the victims has been elusive. Warren Anderson, the CEO of Union Carbide, was arrested but quickly released and never faced trial in India. Union Carbide eventually paid a settlement of $470 million, an amount that many felt was insultingly small compared to the scale of human suffering. For the survivors, the compensation barely covered medical expenses, let alone the loss of loved ones or the lifelong damage they endured. To this day, many victims continue to fight for justice, recognition, and proper health care. The abandoned Union Carbide plant still stands in Bhopal, a haunting reminder of that night. The land around it remains contaminated, the toxic chemicals leaching into the soil and water supply. The children born decades later are still paying the price for a disaster they weren't even alive to witness. It is a cruel legacy of neglect, one that continues to echo through the lives of Bhopal's people. The Bhopal disaster is a sobering lesson on the consequences of corporate negligence and the failure of accountability. It shows how fragile safety is when human lives are treated as expendable. But it is also a story of resilience. The people of Bhopal have continued to fight, to demand justice, and to ensure their voices are heard. Their struggle is a testament to human strength in the face of unimaginable tragedy. The Bhopal disaster stands as a chilling testament to what happens when industrial ambition overshadows ethics and safety. On that fateful night in December 1984, an invisible cloud of deadly methyl isocyanate gas seeped from a pesticide plant, snatching away the breath of thousands within minutes. The sheer scale of the devastation was unimaginable. Entire families perished, children died in their sleep, and survivors were left with lifelong disabilities. But beyond the immediate horror, the deeper tragedy lies in the chain of negligence, greed, and lack of accountability that made such a catastrophe inevitable. How did safety measures fail so catastrophically? Why were the lives of Bhopal's residents deemed less valuable than corporate profits? Even today, industries operate dangerously close to residential areas, and regulations are often toothless, swayed by corporate lobbying and economic pressures. Have we truly fortified ourselves against another Bhopal? Or is the world still a ticking time bomb of complacency and shortcuts? The echoes of Bhopal's tragedy remind us that industrial disasters aren't just accidents. They're predictable outcomes when safety is neglected. We've seen Chernobyl, Deepwater Horizon, Rana Plaza, each a stark warning that lives hang in the balance when profit reigns supreme. The air in Bhopal may be clear now, but the city still breathes pain and injustice. Survivors continue to fight for justice and medical care decades later. Are we paying attention, or are we too quick to forget? What does it say about us if we allow such tragedies to fade into distant memory? The stories of Bhopal's victims, their suffering and resilience, call on us to build a future where human life is not expendable. Let's demand industries that prioritize safety and accountability over profit margins. Let's insist on stricter regulations, transparency, and empathy-driven policies. The memory of those who suffered in Bhopal urges us to act, to create a world where safety isn't a privilege, but a right. Do you believe we've learned enough to prevent another Bhopal? Or are we still standing on the edge of a similar disaster? Share your thoughts in the comments, because remembering Bhopal isn't enough. It's our actions that will define whether we truly honor those lives.